Sometimes life puts the right person in the right place at exactly the moment they're needed most. Sometimes that person carries wounds so deep they never thought they'd heal. The train station in Millbrook sat empty as the sun set on another day. A small girl waited on the platform, no more than 8 years old, holding a porcelain doll tight against her chest. Her parents were supposed to meet her there. They never came. Wade Kimball walked out of the general store and saw her sitting alone. The sight hit him like a punch to the gut. Years ago, he'd lost his own daughter. The pain never went away. Now, here was another little girl with nowhere to go. The whole town knew about Wade's past. They whispered about what happened to his family, but what would make a broken man take in a stranger's child? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Wade Kimball stood 6 feet 4 inches in his worn leather boots, with shoulders that had carried more weight than any man should bear. His hands, scarred from years of hard work and harder choices, trembled slightly as he approached the small figure on the platform. The weathered lines around his eyes told stories of sun and sorrow, of decisions made in darkness that followed him into every dawn. 3 years had passed since he'd buried his daughter Katie beneath the old oak behind his homestead. 3 years. Since the fire that took half of Millbrook's main street, including the boarding house where she'd been staying while he was away on business. 3 years since he'd hung up his guns and retreated to the edges of civilization, building a life of solitude and penance on land that stretched toward the mountains like a prayer for forgiveness. The weathered homestead that had become his. Sanctuary sat 12 miles northwest of town, accessible only by a winding dirt road that discouraged casual visitors. The house itself was built from local timber and stone, solid and practical without pretense. A wide porch wrapped around the front, offering shade during the brutal summer months and shelter when the winter winds howled down from the peaks. Inside, rooms stood largely empty, furnished only with the necessities of a man who had learned to live with less. Katie's room remained exactly as she'd left it 3 years ago. Her small bed with its patchwork quilt, the wooden rocking horse he'd carved for her 6th birthday, and the music box that played a gentle waltz when wound. He couldn't bring himself to change anything, yet couldn't bear to spend more than a few moments inside before the weight of memory drove him back out. The people of Millbrook had long memories and loose tongues. They remembered when Wade Kimball had been someone else entirely, when his name carried weight in saloons and sheriff's offices across 3 territories. They remembered the stories that followed him like shadows. The corrupt sheriff in Deadwood who'd drawn against him and died before his gun cleared leather. The gang of claim jumpers who'd terrorized mining camps until Wade arrived with his peculiar sense of justice. The railroad men who'd learned that some debts could only be paid in blood. Sheriff Tom Jenkins, a decent man with graying hair and perpetually worried eyes, had made peace with Wade's presence in his territory. The violence that had once surrounded Wade like a storm had died with Katie, leaving behind only a broken man who wanted nothing more than to disappear into the wilderness. Jenkins visited the homestead monthly, sharing coffee and conversation. While carefully avoiding mention of the past, they both preferred to forget. Doc Brennan, the town's physician, had been one of the few to show Wade genuine kindness after Katie's death. A man in his 60s with gentle hands and an understanding heart, he'd helped Wade through the darkest months when grief threatened to consume what remained of his sanity. Their friendship had grown slowly, built on shared silences and the doctor's patient refusal to judge a man for his ghosts. Martha Henley taught school in a small building behind the church, educating the children of farmers and shopkeepers with dedication that exceeded her modest salary. She'd known Katie during the girl's brief time in Millbrook School, and her eyes still filled with tears when Wade's name came up in conversation. She understood loss in the way that only someone who'd buried her own husband could understand. General Store was run by Frederick Walsh, a man whose interest in other people's business exceeded his talent for minding his own. His wife Prudence possessed an even sharper tongue and a talent for spreading gossip that traveled faster than news of Indian raids. They tolerated Wade's presence while never missing an opportunity to remind anyone who'd listen about the dangerous man living just outside their peaceful community. Wade's daily routine had become as rigid as a monk's devotions. He rose before dawn to tend the small herd of cattle that provided both purpose and income. The physical labor helped quiet the voices in his head, the ones that whispered about failures and might-have-beens. He'd built corrals and repaired fences with his own hands, finding a kind of salvation in honest work that left him too tired for nightmares. Afternoons were spent maintaining the homestead, chopping wood for winter, cleaning the chimney, patching the roof where mountain storms had found weaknesses. He'd taught himself to cook simple meals and keep house with the same attention to detail he'd once applied to cleaning his weapons. Everything had its place. Everything served a purpose. And nothing was wasted. Evenings brought the hardest hours. With chores completed and daylight fading, memories crept in like unwelcome visitors. He'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee gone cold, watching the sun disappear behind the mountains while Katie's laughter echoed in the wind. Some nights he'd hear her calling for him, and he'd rise from his chair before remembering that voices could lie just as easily as hope. The guns that had once defined him now rested in a wooden chest beneath his bed, wrapped in oiled cloth like relics from a forgotten war. His Colt .45 with its worn walnut grip, the Winchester rifle that had never missed its mark, the hideout gun he'd carried in his boot, all of them sleeping the sleep of things no longer needed. He'd sworn never to touch them again, a promise made over Katie's grave that had become as sacred as any prayer. Yet even in his self-imposed exile, Wade remained aware of the world beyond his fence line. Travelers brought news of trouble brewing in the territories. Cattle rustlers growing bolder, claim jumpers targeting isolated mining operations, and rumors of a particularly vicious gang led by men named Creed who settled disputes with violence and showed no mercy to witnesses. The stories troubled him, not because he feared for his own safety, but because they reminded him of the world Katie might have inherited if she'd lived. Now, standing in the gathering dusk outside Walsh's General Store, Wade felt the familiar weight of decision pressing down on his shoulders. The small girl on the platform couldn't be more than 8 years old, with dark hair that caught the last rays of sunlight and eyes that held too much knowledge for her age. Her dress, though clean, showed signs of long travel, and the porcelain doll she clutched possessed the worn appearance of a treasured companion. No train was scheduled to arrive until morning, yet she sat with the patience of someone accustomed to waiting. Her small traveling bag rested beside her on the bench, along with a wooden crate that might contain the sum total of her worldly possessions. She didn't cry or call out for help, but something in her stillness spoke of resignation that no child should possess. Wade approached slowly, his boots loud on the weathered planks. The girl looked up at him with eyes the color of autumn leaves, and he saw something that made his chest tighten. She wasn't afraid of him. In a world where most people crossed the street to avoid his presence, this child simply waited to see what he might offer. "Evening, miss," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. "You waiting for someone?" She nodded solemnly. "Mama and Papa were supposed to meet me here. The conductor said they'd be waiting." Wade glanced around the empty platform, then back at the girl. "What time was that supposed to happen?" "When the train got here," she said, "but that was before dinner time." The train had arrived at 3 o'clock, nearly 5 hours ago. Wade felt something cold settle in his stomach as he considered the implications. Parents didn't simply forget to collect their children from train stations, not unless something had prevented them from coming. "What's your name, child?" "Molly Harper," she said, shifting the doll to one arm so she could extend a small hand. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, sir." Her manners spoke of careful upbringing, the kind of politeness that parents drilled into children who might need to make good impressions on strangers. Wade shook her hand gently, noting the calluses that suggested she was no stranger to work despite her age. "I'm Wade Kimball," he said. "Do you have somewhere to stay while you wait for your folks?" Molly shook her head. "I don't know anyone in Millbrook except Mama and Papa, and they're not here yet." The evening air was growing cool, and Wade could see goosebumps rising on the girl's arms. He looked toward town, where lights were beginning to flicker in windows as families gathered for supper. Sheriff Jenkins would be the proper person to handle this situation. But something made Wade hesitate. Perhaps it was the way Molly held her doll, or the trust in her eyes when she looked at him, or simply the echo of another little girl who'd once depended on him for protection. "Well, Miss Molly Harper," he said, surprising himself with his decision, "I reckon you'd better come home with me tonight. We'll sort out what happened to your folks in the morning." She considered this gravely, as if weighing the wisdom of trusting a strange man in a strange town. Then she nodded and began gathering her belongings. "Thank you, Mr. Kimball. Mama always said there were good people in the world if you knew how to recognize them." As Wade helped her with her traveling bag and crate, he wondered what Katie would have thought of this moment. Would she have approved of his decision to help another lost child? Or would she have wondered why he couldn't save her when it mattered most? The ride to his homestead passed in comfortable silence, with Molly perched beside him on the wagon seat, still clutching her doll. She watched the landscape with the curiosity of someone seeing new country for the first time, occasionally pointing out an interesting rock formation or asking about the cattle grazing in distant pastures. When they reached the homestead, Wade felt a strange mixture of pride and uncertainty as he saw it through fresh eyes. The house looked solid and welcoming in the lamplight, with smoke rising from the chimney and yellow light spilling from the windows. It had been 3 years since another person had crossed his threshold. 3 years since he'd shared a meal or conversation in his own home. "It's a nice house," Molly said as he helped her down from the wagon. "Do you live here all by yourself?" "I do," Wade said, leading her toward the porch. "It might be a bit quiet for someone your age." "I don't mind quiet," she said. "Sometimes quiet is better than loud." There was something in her tone that made Wade glance down at her, but she was studying the house with apparent fascination. He pushed open the front door and lit the lamps, watching as warm light revealed the simple furnishings and clean surfaces of his bachelor existence. "Are you hungry?" he asked, suddenly aware that he had no idea how to care for a child. "Yes, sir," Molly said politely. "But I can help cook if you need me to. Mama taught me how to make biscuits and scrambled eggs." The offer touched something deep in Wade's chest, reminding him of evenings when Katie had insisted on helping with dinner preparations. More hindrance than help, but welcomed nonetheless. He found himself nodding and gesturing toward the kitchen. "I'd appreciate the company," he said, and meant it. As they worked together preparing a simple meal, Wade felt the walls he'd built around his heart beginning to crack. This strange little girl, with her careful manners and trusting eyes, had walked into his life carrying nothing but a doll and a suitcase. Yet somehow she'd already begun to change everything. He didn't know what had happened to her parents, or what morning would bring, but for the first time in 3 years, Wade Kimball wasn't eating dinner alone. And despite every instinct that warned him against caring too much, he found himself hoping that morning was still a long way off. The next morning brought answers that Wade wished he'd never received. While Molly slept peacefully in Katie's old room, he'd rummaged through her small traveling bag looking for some clue about her parents' whereabouts. What he found instead was a letter stained with something dark that his experienced eyes recognized immediately as blood. The envelope bore Molly's name in a woman's careful handwriting, but the letter inside was written in a man's hurried scrawl. Wade's hands trembled as he read words that painted a picture of violence and desperation that no child should ever have to understand. "My dearest Molly," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then your mother and I did not make it to Millbrook. As planned, The men who have been hunting us finally found our trail near Copper Creek. We tried to run, tried to reach you before they caught up, but I fear we have failed in that, as in so many other things." Wade's throat tightened as he continued reading. "The Creed gang wants our mining claim, and they're willing to kill anyone who stands in their way. We should have sold it to them when they first asked, but your father is a stubborn man who believed. Right would triumph over might. I pray that our mistake doesn't cost you your life as well." The letter went on to explain that James and Catherine Harper had discovered silver on their claim near Leadville, but their good fortune had attracted the attention of Vincent Creed and his brothers. The Creeds had made increasingly violent demands for the Harpers to sell their claim for a fraction of its worth. When the family refused, the threats had escalated to attempts on their lives. "We sent you ahead to Millbrook because we thought you'd be safe there," the letter continued. "Your Aunt Margaret was supposed to meet you and take you to her farm in Kansas, but I fear something may have happened to her as well. The Creeds have long memories and longer reach than we ever imagined." Wade felt sick as he read the final paragraphs. "If we don't come for you, find a man named Wade Kimball. He lives outside Millbrook and owes your father a debt that can never be repaid. Tell him James Harper sent you, and he'll understand. Wade is a hard man with a violent past, but he's also the only person we trust to keep you safe from the devils that hunt our family." The letter was signed, "Your loving mother, Catherine Harper," in the same careful handwriting as the envelope. Below that, in different ink, someone had added, "Wade, they got us at Devil's Canyon. Keep her safe. James Wade." Stared at the letter for a long time, his mind racing through implications and memories. James Harper. The name hit him like a physical blow, dragging him back 15 years to a dusty street in Tombstone, where a young deputy had stepped between Wade and 3 armed men who'd come to collect on a gambling debt he couldn't pay. James. Harper had been fresh out of the Territorial Academy, all idealism and nervous courage, when he'd faced down killers twice his age and experience. He'd taken a bullet in the shoulder that day, a wound that had ended his law enforcement career. Before it really began, Wade had carried the unconscious deputy to safety, but by the time James recovered, Wade had already moved on to the next town and the next trouble. They'd crossed paths several times over the years, usually in situations where James's sense of justice had put him at odds with men who settled disputes with violence. Wade had never asked for James's help, but the younger man had a talent for appearing whenever the odds were stacked against decency. Their friendship had been built on shared dangers and mutual respect, though they'd lost touch when Wade retired. His guns and James started a family. Now James Harper was dead, killed by the same kind of men who'd once hunted Wade across half the territory. And his daughter, Wade's goddaughter, though he'd never known of her existence, was sleeping in the next room, trusting a stranger to keep her safe because her dying father had remembered an old debt. Wade folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket. The weight of it felt heavier than his guns had ever been. Through the thin walls, he could hear Molly stirring, probably waking to sunlight streaming through Katie's bedroom window. In a few minutes she'd emerge asking about breakfast and wondering when her parents would arrive. He'd have to find words to explain the unexplainable, to tell a child that her world had ended while she slept peacefully in a stranger's house. But first, he had preparations to make. The Creed gang's reputation had reached even his isolated homestead through stories carried by travelers and newspaper accounts of their increasing boldness. Vincent Creed and his 2 brothers led a crew of 15 to 20 men who specialized in claim jumping and intimidation. They'd killed entire families to secure mining rights, burned out settlers who refused to sell their land, and bribed or murdered any lawman who tried to stop them. If they'd tracked the Harpers to Millbrook, they'd eventually track Molly here as well. A child was a loose end, a potential witness who might someday identify the men who'd killed her parents. Wade had seen enough of their handiwork to know they wouldn't let her live out of mercy or sentiment. He walked to his bedroom and knelt beside the bed, pulling out the wooden chest that held his past. The familiar weight of his Colt 45 felt strange in his hands after 3 years of disuse, but the muscle memory remained. He checked the action, cleaned the barrel, and loaded 6 fresh cartridges into the cylinder. The Winchester rifle required similar attention, along with the boxes of ammunition he'd stored away like artifacts from another life. By the time Molly appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, Wade had hidden the weapons, where she wouldn't see them but could reach them quickly if needed. He'd also begun mentally cataloguing the homestead's defensive advantages and weaknesses, falling back into tactical thinking that felt both foreign and familiar. "Good morning, Mr. Kimball," Molly said politely, still clutching her porcelain doll. "Did Mama and Papa come for me yet?" Wade's chest tightened as he looked at her trusting face. She wore one of Katie's old nightgowns that he'd found in the bureau, and the sight threatened to break what remained of his composure. "Sit down, Molly," he said gently. "We need to talk about your folks." She climbed into a chair at the kitchen table, arranging her doll carefully beside her plate. "Are they coming today?" "No, sweetheart," Wade said, choosing his words with infinite care. "They're not coming. Something bad happened to them on their way here, and they won't be able to take care of you anymore." Molly stared at him for a long moment, her young face processing information that no child should have to understand. "Are they dead?" The directness of her question caught Wade off guard. He'd expected tears, denial, or at least confusion. Instead, she watched him with eyes that seemed far older than her 8 years. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm sorry, Molly, they're dead." She nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. "I thought they might be. Mama said if anything happened to them, I should find you. She said you'd take care of me." Wade felt something shift inside his chest, a combination of grief for his old friend and determination to honor the trust James had placed in him. "Your mama was right," he said. "I'm going to take care of you no matter what, even if the bad men—" "Come here," the question chilled Wade to the bone. "What do you know about bad men, Molly?" "Mama and Papa talked about them when they thought I was sleeping," she said matter-of-factly. "They wanted our mine, and they hurt people who wouldn't give them what they wanted. That's why Mama and Papa sent me on the train, to keep me safe from the bad men." Wade reached across the table and took her small hand in his scarred one. "The bad men might come here looking for you," he said honestly, "but I won't let them hurt you. I promise." Molly squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "Mama said you were the strongest man she ever knew. She said you could protect anyone from anything if you wanted to." The faith in her voice humbled Wade more than any praise he'd ever received. James and Catherine Harper had bet their daughter's life on his ability to keep her safe, and he'd be damned if he'd let them down. The Creed gang might have money, numbers, and a reputation for ruthlessness, but they'd never faced Wade Kimball, fighting for something more precious than his own life. "We're going to be all right," he told Molly, and for the first time in 3 years, Wade Kimball meant every word of a promise he made. The first week of caring for Molly taught Wade that he'd forgotten more about raising a child than he'd ever known in the first place. Simple tasks that had seemed natural with Katie now felt awkward and uncertain. Cooking breakfast meant accommodating a child's preferences, which apparently didn't include black coffee and day-old biscuits. Molly politely ate whatever he prepared, but he could see her struggling with portions too large and flavors too harsh for her palate. "I can cook, Mr. Kimball," she offered on the 3rd morning, watching him burn another batch of eggs. "Mama taught me how to make things that taste good." Wade stepped aside gratefully, watching as she efficiently prepared a simple meal that put his efforts to shame. She hummed softly while she worked, the same way Katie used to hum when she was concentrating. The similarity made his throat tight, but it also filled him with unexpected warmth. Their daily routine developed gradually, shaped by necessity and Molly's remarkable adaptability. She woke early without complaint, helped with breakfast, and followed him around the homestead as he completed his chores. Her questions were endless but thoughtful. Why did the cattle stay together in groups? How did he know which wood was Best for building fences, what made the mountains look purple in the evening light. Wade found himself talking more in a week than he had in the previous 3 years. Molly's genuine curiosity about everything from weather patterns to animal behavior drew responses from him almost against his will. He explained how to read the sky for storm signs, how to approach a nervous horse, why certain plants grew only in shaded areas. Her quick understanding and careful attention reminded him of the joy he'd once found in teaching Katie about the world. The child's resilience amazed him. She'd lost her parents in violence and been placed in the care of a virtual stranger, yet she adapted to her new circumstances with a grace that humbled him. She never complained about the simple meals, the austere furnishings, or the isolation of the homestead. Instead, she seemed genuinely grateful for safety and shelter. On the 4th day, while Wade repaired a section of fence damaged by winter storms, Molly disappeared into the house without explanation. He found her an hour later, standing in the doorway of Katie's room, staring at the untouched space with the solemn expression she wore when processing difficult truths. "This was your little girl's room, wasn't it?" she asked, without turning around. Wade's breath caught in his throat. He'd meant to explain about Katie, to prepare Molly for the emotional landmines scattered throughout the house, but somehow the right moment had never arrived. "Yes," he said simply. Molly stepped into the room and approached the small music box. On the dresser, she studied its delicate painted flowers and brass winding key with the careful attention she gave to everything that mattered. What was her name? Katie. Catherine, really, but she liked Katie better. How old was she? 7 when she died. Would have been 10 now. Molly nodded thoughtfully, her fingers tracing the edge of the music box without touching the key. She had nice things. This music box is beautiful. Wade moved to stand beside her, seeing the room through fresh eyes. Katie's belongings did look beautiful in the afternoon light. The patchwork quilt their neighbor Mrs. Henderson had sewn, the wooden rocking horse with its carefully painted mane, the collection of smooth stones Katie had gathered from the creek. Behind the house, she loved that music box, Wade said, his voice rough with memory. Her mother gave it to her for her 6th birthday, just before... He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Before her mama died too?" Molly asked gently. Wade nodded. "Consumption took her mother when Katie was 5. After that, it was just Katie and me until the fire." Molly reached out and carefully wound the music box key. The gentle waltz that emerged filled the room with melody that Wade hadn't heard in 3 years. Instead of the crushing pain he'd expected, he felt something lighter. Sadness, yes, but also the sweetness of remembering joy instead of loss. "She would have liked you," he said, surprised by his own words. "I would have liked her too," Molly replied seriously. "She had a papa who loved her very much. You can tell by how he kept everything just the way she left it." The simple observation broke something loose in Wade's chest. For 3 years, he'd maintained Katie's room as a shrine to his guilt, a daily reminder of his failure to protect her. But through Molly's eyes, he saw it differently. Not as a monument to loss, but as evidence of love that death couldn't diminish. "Would you like to stay in here?" he asked impulsively. "I mean, if you think Katie wouldn't mind sharing." Molly considered this seriously, still listening to the music box's gentle tune. "Do you think she'd like having a sister for a while?" The word sister hit Wade like a physical blow. He'd never thought of their arrangement in those terms, had been careful to maintain emotional distance while providing practical care. But Molly's innocent question forced him to confront what was already happening in his heart. "I think she'd love it," he said honestly. That evening, they moved Molly's few possessions into Katie's room. Wade helped her arrange her clothes in the small bureau, trying not to notice how little space they occupied. Her porcelain doll found a place of honor on the nightstand beside Katie's music box, 2 treasured companions keeping watch through the darkness. The next morning brought their first visitor since Molly's arrival. Doc Brennan rode up to the homestead, with his familiar black bag and concerned expression, clearly having heard rumors about Wade's unexpected houseguest. "Morning, Wade," the doctor called as he dismounted. "Heard you had some company." Wade emerged from the barn where he'd been grooming his horse, Molly trailing behind with an armload of fresh hay for the animals. Doc Brennan's eyes widened as he took in the sight of the small girl, and Wade saw understanding dawn on the older man's weathered features. "Doc, I'd like you to meet Molly Harper," Wade said carefully. "Molly, this is Doc Brennan. He's a good friend." Molly stepped forward and offered a polite curtsy, her manners impeccable despite her simple dress and hay-dusted apron. "Pleased to meet you, Dr. Brennan. The pleasure's mine, young lady," Doc said, his voice gentler than Wade had ever heard it. "How are you settling in with old Wade here?" "He's taking very good care of me," Molly said loyally. "He's teaching me about cattle and horses and how to read the weather." Doc Brennan glanced at Wade with raised eyebrows, clearly noting the protective tone in the child's voice and the corresponding change in Wade's demeanor. "Is that so? Well, Wade's always been good with young folks." Later, while Molly played with her doll on the porch, Doc Brennan pulled Wade aside for a private conversation. "She's James Harper's daughter, isn't she?" he said without preamble. Wade nodded grimly. "You heard about what happened to James and Catherine? Word travels fast in small towns. Creed gang killed them near Devil's Canyon, from what I heard." "Nasty business." Doc studied Wade's face carefully. "You planning to keep her?" "James asked me to," Wade said simply. "That's not what I'm asking, and you know it." Wade looked toward the porch where Molly sat singing softly to her doll, her voice carrying the same tune as Katie's music box. "She doesn't have anyone else, Doc. And he paused, struggling with emotions he'd kept buried for 3 years. "I can't lose another daughter." Doc Brennan placed a weathered hand on Wade's shoulder. "Then you'd better be prepared to fight for her. The Creed gang doesn't leave loose ends, and that little girl is the biggest loose end they've got." The nightmares began on Molly's 8th night at the homestead. Wade woke to the sound of muffled crying and found her sitting up in bed, clutching her porcelain doll, while tears streamed down her face. In the dim moonlight, filtering through Katie's bedroom window, she looked impossibly small and vulnerable. "Bad dream?" he asked softly from the doorway. Molly nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I dreamed about Mama and Papa. They were calling for me, but I couldn't reach them, because the bad men were in the way." Wade sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to crowd her. "Dreams can't hurt you, sweetheart. Your Mama and Papa are safe now, and so are you. But I miss them so much," she whispered. "Sometimes I forget they're gone, and I think they're going to come get me after all." The honesty of her grief cut through Wade's defenses like a blade. He'd spent 3 years avoiding his own pain, but Molly's tears demanded something more than avoidance. "I know," he said. "I miss Katie the same way. Sometimes I still think I hear her laughing in the next room." Molly looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Does it ever stop hurting?" "It changes," Wade said carefully. "The sharp hurt becomes something softer, like a bruise that's healing. You never stop missing them, but you learn to carry the missing along with the good memories. Will you stay until I fall asleep?" she asked. Wade nodded and settled into the rocking chair beside the bed. As Molly curled up with her doll, he began humming the tune from Katie's music box. His voice was rough and unpracticed, but the familiar melody seemed to comfort them both. Within minutes, Molly's breathing had evened into sleep. The incident marked a turning point in their relationship. Molly began seeking Wade out for comfort as well as instruction, and he found himself responding with an ease that surprised him. When she scraped her knee helping with chores, she ran to him for bandaging and sympathy. When thunderstorms rolled down from the mountains, she crept close to his chair by the fireplace, finding security in his steady presence. Wade, in turn, discovered that caring for Molly awakened protective instincts he'd thought died with Katie. He found himself checking on her throughout the night, ensuring she was warm enough, safe enough, happy enough. Her laughter became the sound he looked forward to hearing each morning, and her questions gave purpose to days that had once stretched empty before him. Their trips to town for supplies became exercises in careful diplomacy. Molly's presence at Wade's side generated whispers and speculation that followed them through every shop and establishment. Some townspeople regarded her with sympathy, understanding that Wade was providing sanctuary for an orphaned child. Others viewed the arrangement with suspicion, wondering what a man with Wade's reputation might want with a young girl. Martha Henley proved to be an unexpected ally. The school teacher approached them outside the general store on their third visit to town, her expression warm and welcoming, despite the curious stares of other shoppers. "Mr. Kimball," she said with a polite nod before turning her full attention to Molly. "And you must be Miss Harper. I've heard so much about you." Molly stepped slightly behind Wade, but managed a polite greeting. "Yes, ma'am. Are you the teacher?" I am indeed. I was wondering if you might like to visit my school sometime. We have several children your age, and I think you'd find our lessons quite interesting." Wade saw the longing in Molly's eyes at the mention of other children and formal lessons. He'd been teaching her what he could about practical matters, but he had no gift for arithmetic or literature. "That's very kind of you, Miss Henley. What would that involve?" "Nothing formal at first," Martha assured him. "Perhaps Molly could join us for an afternoon, see how she likes our little classroom. If she enjoys it, we could discuss regular attendance." That evening, Wade found himself retrieving the wooden chest from beneath his bed, not to clean his weapons this time, but to examine them with the calculating eye of a man preparing for war. The Creed gang's reputation for thoroughness meant they'd eventually track Molly to Millbrook, and when they did, Wade needed to be ready. His gun belt felt strange around his waist after 3 years of disuse, but the weight of the Colt against his hip brought back muscle memories and tactical instincts he'd thought forgotten. He practiced his draw in the barn, away from Molly's eyes, finding that his speed had diminished, but not disappeared entirely. The Winchester rifle he cleaned and loaded before propping it beside the front door, within easy reach but disguised. Among the farming tools and household implements, he checked the ammunition for his spare weapons and made mental notes about defensive positions around the homestead. On their next visit to town, Wade made a point of visiting Sheriff Jenkins's office. The lawman looked up from his paperwork with the weary expression of a man who'd learned to expect trouble with every visitor. "Wade," Jenkins said carefully, "heard you've got James Harper's little girl staying with you." "That's right," Wade confirmed. "Her parents asked me to look after her." Jenkins leaned back in his chair, studying Wade's face for clues about his intentions. "Folks are talking. Some think it's mighty charitable of you to take in an orphan. Others wonder what a man like you wants with a child." "Let them wonder," Wade said evenly. "What I want to know is whether you've heard anything about strangers asking questions around town." The sheriff's expression sharpened. "What kind of strangers?" "The kind that killed James and Catherine Harper, the kind that don't like leaving witnesses alive." Jenkins was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of Wade's words. "You think they'll come here?" "I think they'll go anywhere they need to go to tie up loose ends. And Molly Harper is the loosest end they've got. What do you want from me, Wade? Just keep your ears open. If anyone starts asking about a man with a little girl, I'd appreciate knowing about it." The sheriff nodded slowly. "I can do that. But, Wade, if trouble comes to Millbrook because of that child, I'll do whatever it takes to protect this town, even if that means asking you to leave." Wade met the man's eyes steadily. "If trouble comes to Millbrook, Sheriff, it won't be because of Molly. It'll be because evil men decided that an 8-year-old girl's life was worth less than their secrets." That evening, as Wade helped Molly with her letters by lamplight, she looked up at him with the serious expression that meant she was working through something important. "Papa Wade," she said, using the name she'd started calling him without his permission or objection, "are you worried about something?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. "What makes you ask that? You've been checking the windows more, and you moved that rifle by the door. Mama used to do things like that when she was worried about the bad men." Wade set down his pen and looked at her earnest face. Lying to her would be easier, but Molly had already seen too much of the world's darkness to be fooled by comfortable deceptions. I'm being careful, he said honestly. Your mama and papa asked me to keep you safe, and that means watching for danger even when we can't see it. Molly nodded solemnly. Mama taught me hiding places and secret signals in case the bad men ever found us. Do you want me to teach you? The offer, made with such innocent practicality, broke Wade's heart and filled him with fierce pride simultaneously. This child had survived horrors that would break grown men, yet she was offering to share her hard-won knowledge to help protect them both. I'd like that very much, he said. Tomorrow you can show me all the best hiding spots around the homestead. As they returned to the lesson, Wade made a silent promise to James Harper's memory. Whatever came, whoever threatened the fragile peace they'd built together, he would be ready. The Creed gang might have killed Molly's parents, but they'd have to go through Wade Kimball to claim their final prize. The first time Molly called him Papa Wade, without thinking about it, Wade was teaching her to milk the cow. She'd been struggling with the technique, her small hands having difficulty generating enough pressure to produce a steady stream. When she finally managed to fill half a bucket without spilling, she turned to him with a triumphant smile. "Look, Papa Wade, I did it!" The name slipped out naturally, as if she'd been calling him that all her life. Wade felt something shift deep in his chest, a warmth he'd thought died with Katie. The joy on Molly's face as she mastered a new skill reminded him of all the small victories he'd celebrated with his own daughter. First steps, first words, first successful attempts at grown-up tasks. "You sure did, sweetheart," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Katie would have been proud of you." Molly's expression grew thoughtful. "Do you think she watches us sometimes?" "Katie, I mean?" Wade considered the question seriously. "I'd like to think so. I hope she knows you're taking good care of her music box and her room." "I tell her about our days," Molly confided. "Every night before I wind the music box, I tell her what we did and what we learned. I think she likes having company." The simple faith in her words humbled Wade. While he'd spent 3 years wrestling with guilt and regret, this child had found a way to honor Katie's memory that brought comfort instead of pain. Through Molly's eyes, he began to see his daughter's possessions not as reminders of loss, but as bridges between past and present love. Their peaceful routine was shattered on a Tuesday morning when Frederick Walsh arrived at the homestead in an agitated state. The general store owner's horse was lathered with sweat, and his usually neat appearance was disheveled. Wade met him in the yard, noting the fear in the man's eyes. "Wade, we need to talk," Walsh said without preamble. "Privately." Wade glanced toward the house where Molly was helping prepare breakfast. "Molly, stay inside for a minute. Mr. Walsh and I have some business to discuss." When the door closed behind her, Walsh pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "This and came in on yesterday's supply wagon. Thought you should see it." Wade unfolded the paper and felt his blood turn cold. It was a wanted poster, crudely printed but unmistakably accurate. His own face stared back at him from the aged paper, younger and harder than his current appearance, but clearly recognizable. Below his likeness, bold letters proclaimed, "Wade Kimball, the Millbrook Ghost, 500 reward, dead or alive." "Where did this come from?" Wade asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Bounty hunter named Fletcher brought it through town." "Yesterday," Walsh said nervously, "he was asking questions about a big man living alone outside town. Sheriff Jenkins told him we don't harbor fugitives in Millbrook, but Fletcher seemed mighty interested in the description." Wade studied the poster more carefully. The details were accurate: his height, approximate age, distinguishing scars. Someone had done their research, which meant this wasn't a random bounty posting. Someone specifically wanted Wade Kimball found, and they were willing to pay well for the privilege. "This Fletcher still in town?" Wade asked. "Left this morning, heading north." "But Wade—" Walsh hesitated, clearly struggling with something unpleasant. He wasn't the only one asking questions. 2 other men came through last week claiming to be cattle buyers. They were asking about families in the area, particularly anyone with children. The implication hit Wade like a physical blow. The Creed gang hadn't forgotten about Molly, and they were closing in. The bounty poster was either a coincidence or, more likely, a way to flush Wade into the open by making his location known to every gun-hungry drifter in 3 territories. "I appreciate you bringing this to me, Frederick," Wade said carefully. "But I need to ask, are you planning to tell anyone else about it?" Walsh shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Wade, I know you've been keeping to yourself since Katie died, and that little girl seems to have brought some life back to you. But $500 is more money than most folks in Millbrook see in 2 years. Is that a threat, Frederick?" "It's a warning," Walsh said firmly. "Not everyone in town is as understanding as Doc Brennan or Miss Henley. Times are hard, and desperate people do desperate things. If word gets out about this poster, you might find yourself with more trouble than you can handle." Wade nodded, slowly. "Then I suppose I'd better make sure word doesn't get out." Walsh's eyes widened at the quiet menace in Wade's tone. "I'm not looking for trouble, Wade. I just thought you should know what you're up against." "I appreciate that," Wade said, his voice returning to normal. "And Frederick, if anyone else comes around asking questions about me or Molly, I'd consider it a personal favor if you'd let me know right away." After Walsh departed, Wade stood in his yard, staring at the wanted poster. $500 was enough to tempt even honest men, and there were plenty of dishonest ones who'd kill for far less. His past had finally caught up with him, just when he'd found something worth protecting with his life. He burned the poster in the kitchen stove, watching his younger face curl and blacken in the flames. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. Wade Kimball, the gunfighter, was truly dead now, consumed by necessity and circumstance. What remained was Papa Wade, a man whose greatest skill was no longer killing, but loving. That afternoon, while Molly napped, Wade made a difficult decision. He saddled his horse and rode to town, not to the sheriff's office or the general store, but to the small church where he knew he'd find Martha Henley preparing lessons for the next day. The school teacher looked up in surprise as Wade's large frame filled the doorway. "Mr. Kimball, is everything all right?" "Miss Henley, I need to ask a favor," Wade said without preamble. "A big one." Martha set down her lesson plans and gave him her full attention. "What can I do for you?" "If something happens to me, if I can't take care of Molly anymore, would you see that she's looked after? There's money hidden at the homestead, enough to send her back east to a good family or keep her here if she prefers." The teacher's face grew pale. "Wade, what's wrong? What kind of trouble are you expecting?" "The kind that follows men like me whether we want it or not," Wade said honestly. "Molly's parents trusted me to keep her safe, and I won't break that promise. But I need to know that if something happens to me, she won't be left alone again." Martha studied his weathered face for a long moment. "She means that much to you?" "She means everything to me," Wade said simply. "I lost one daughter to circumstances beyond my control. I won't lose another." "Then you'd better make sure nothing happens to you," Martha said firmly. "That little girl has already lost 2 parents. Losing a third would break her heart." Wade nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility in her words. As he rode home through the gathering dusk, he reflected on how much his life had changed in just 3 weeks. He'd gone from a man with nothing left to lose to someone with everything to protect. The transformation terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. When he reached the homestead, Molly ran out to greet him with her usual enthusiasm. "Papa Wade, I finished all my letters, and I made cornbread for dinner." Looking down at her radiant face, Wade felt his resolve crystallize into something harder than steel. Whatever was coming, bounty hunters, the Creed gang, or any other threat, they'd have to go through him first. And Wade Kimball, whatever name he might carry, had never been easy to kill. The hand-drawn map appeared on Wade's kitchen table like a gift from Providence. Molly had been working on it for days, using precious paper and colored pencils that Martha Henley had given her. What started as a simple drawing exercise had become an intricate layout of the entire homestead, complete with every building, fence line, and hiding spot she'd discovered during her weeks of exploration. "See, Papa Wade," Molly said proudly, pointing to various marks on her creation. "This cave behind the big rocks is where I hide when we play seeking games, and here's the root cellar that stays cool even when it's hot outside. Oh, and this hollow tree by the creek, you can fit a whole person inside if they're not too big." Wade studied the map with growing amazement. Molly had identified defensive positions he'd overlooked, escape routes he hadn't considered, and sight lines that could prove crucial in a firefight. Her child's perspective had revealed tactical advantages that his adult mind had missed. "This is excellent work, sweetheart," he said, meaning every word. "You've got a good eye for important details." "Mama taught me to notice things," Molly said seriously. "She said knowing your surroundings could save your life someday." The wisdom of Catherine Harper's teaching struck Wade like a revelation. This child wasn't just naturally observant. She'd been trained by parents who understood the value of situational awareness. The Harpers had prepared their daughter for danger without frightening her, disguising survival skills as games and adventures. That evening brought an unexpected visitor. Doc Brennan arrived just as Wade was teaching Molly to clean and oil the household tools, a lesson that included gun maintenance, disguised as general equipment care. "Evening, Wade," the doctor called as he dismounted. "Mind if I come in?" "Got something to discuss." Wade nodded toward the house, but Doc Brennan shook his head. "Best we talk outside first, man to man." Wade glanced at Molly, who was absorbed in carefully cleaning an old pistol that hadn't been fired in years. "Molly, why don't you finish up here while Doc and I step onto the porch?" Outside, Doc Brennan got straight to the point. "I know what you're planning, Wade, and I can't let you do it alone." "I don't know what you mean." "Don't treat me like a fool," the older man said firmly. "You're preparing for a siege. I can see it in how you've positioned supplies, how you're teaching that girl skills she shouldn't need to know. Words gotten. Around about bounty hunters and strange men asking questions. You're getting ready for war." Wade studied his friend's weathered face. "Even if that were true, it's not your fight, Doc." "The hell it isn't," Brennan replied with surprising heat. "I've been doctoring folks in this territory for 30 years. I've seen what men like the Creeds do to families, and I'll be damned if I let it happen to that little girl." "Doc, you're a healer, not a gunfighter." "I'm also a man who took an oath to do no harm," Brennan said. "Sometimes that means standing between evil and innocence, whatever the cost." Wade felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced since his gunfighting days, when good men chose to stand together against impossible odds. "You sure about this, Doc? Once you're in, there's no backing out." "I've been sure since the day you brought her home," Brennan said firmly. "That child deserves a chance to grow up safe and loved. If that means fighting, then we fight." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Wade's hand moved instinctively toward his gun before he recognized Sheriff Jenkins's familiar silhouette against the evening sky. The lawman rode up slowly, his posture tense with the weight of unwelcome news. "Wade," Jenkins said without dismounting, "we need to talk." "Trouble?" Wade asked, though he could already see the answer in the sheriff's expression. "3 men rode through town this afternoon asking questions about you and the girl. They didn't give names, but they had the look of professional killers. When I told them we don't harbor fugitives, they laughed and said they weren't looking for fugitives. They were looking for witnesses." Wade felt ice form in his veins. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing useful, but it won't matter. They're not stupid and they're not going away. They made camp about 5 miles north of town, close enough to watch the roads, but far enough to avoid being watched themselves." Doc Brennan stepped forward. "How many men are we talking about, Sheriff?" Jenkins looked between the 2 men, clearly debating how much to reveal. "The 3 I saw, plus at least 6 more at their camp. Maybe more coming. They're well armed and organized, not some ragtag bunch of drifters." "Creed gang," Wade said with certainty. "They've found us." "What do you want to do?" Jenkins asked. "I can deputize a few men, try to run them out of the territory." Wade shook his head. "That'll just get good men killed. This is between them. And me?" "No," Doc Brennan said firmly. This is between them and us, all of us who won't stand by while they murder children. Before Wade could respond, Molly appeared in the doorway. "Papa Wade, is everything all right?" Wade turned to look at her, this small girl who'd somehow become the center of his world. She stood framed in the yellow lamplight, still holding the cleaning cloth she'd been using on the old pistol. Her expression was calm, but alert, the look of someone who'd learned to read danger in adult faces. "Come here, sweetheart," Wade said gently. Molly approached slowly, her eyes moving between the three tense men. When she reached Wade's side, she slipped her small hand into his scarred one with complete trust. "Molly," Wade said carefully, "remember those hiding games we've been playing? Well, we might need to play them for real soon. Do you remember all your best spots?" She nodded solemnly. "The cave, the root cellar, the hollow tree, and the space under the floorboards in Katie's room." "That's my smart girl," Wade said, squeezing her hand. "If I tell you to hide, you go to the safest spot you can reach and stay there until I come for you. No matter what you hear, no matter how long it takes." "Are the bad men coming, Papa Wade?" Wade looked down at her upturned face, so trusting and brave despite everything she'd already endured. "They might be, sweetheart, but I won't let them hurt you. I promise." Molly squeezed his hand tighter. "I know. You're the strongest man in the world, remember? Mama told me so." After putting Molly to bed, the three men sat around Wade's kitchen table, making plans that none of them wanted to make. Doc Brennan revealed that he still owned a rifle from his army days and knew how to use it. Sheriff Jenkins offered to bring what deputies he could trust, men who understood that some fights were worth having regardless of the legal complications. Wade found himself thinking of James Harper, wondering if his old friend had ever imagined that his final request would lead to this. Good men preparing to risk their lives for his daughter's future. The debt Wade owed James had grown beyond simple protection into something approaching sacred duty. "They'll come at dawn," Wade said, studying Molly's hand-drawn map. "It's what I do. Catch us when we're least alert, least prepared." "How long do we have?" Doc asked. Wade considered the tactical situation. If they're smart, they'll scout tonight, attack tomorrow. If they're impatient, they might come tonight. "Then we'd better be ready for both," Jenkins said grimly. As his unlikely allies prepared for battle, Wade checked on Molly one final time. She slept peacefully in Katie's bed, her porcelain doll clutched against her chest, and the music box silent on the nightstand. In the morning, she might wake to the sound of gunfire and violence, but tonight she dreamed safely under his protection. Whatever came with the dawn, Wade Kimball would be ready. Wade was packing emergency supplies when he found the locket. Hidden in the false bottom of Molly's small traveling case, beneath spare undergarments and a child's prayer book, lay a delicate silver heart on a tarnished chain. His hands trembled as he opened it, revealing two small photographs that stopped his world completely. The left side held a picture of a young woman, with Molly's eyes and gentle smile. Catherine Harper, no doubt. But it was the right side that sent shockwaves through Wade's chest. The face staring back at him belonged to James Harper, but not the James Harper he remembered. This was a younger man, clean-shaven and wearing a deputy's badge, but unmistakably the same person who'd saved Wade's life 15 years ago in Tombstone. Wade sank into a chair, the locket heavy in his palm. Memories cascaded through his mind, like falling dominoes, reshaping everything he thought he knew about his connection to this family. James Harper hadn't just been a fellow lawman who'd helped him out of a tight spot. He'd been the brave young deputy whose intervention had changed the entire course of Wade's life. The gambling debt that had brought 3 killers to Tombstone had been Wade's last mistake as a reckless young gunfighter. He'd been drinking too much, taking too many risks, living like a man who didn't care whether he saw another sunrise. When those 3 men cornered him outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, Wade had been prepared to die for his stupidity. But James Harper had stepped between them, badge gleaming in the lamplight, voice steady despite his youth and obvious fear. "This doesn't have to end in bloodshed, gentlemen. Why don't we talk about whatever Mr. Kimball owes you?" The leader of the three had laughed and told James to walk away while he still could. That's when James had done something that still amazed. Wade, 15 years later, the young deputy had calmly unbuttoned his coat, revealing a gun belt that looked well used despite his clean-cut appearance. "I'm afraid I can't do that," James had said politely. "It's my job to keep the peace in this town, and killing folks in the street tends to disturb that peace considerably." The gunfight that followed had been brief and decisive. James Harper might have looked like a greenhorn, but he'd been faster than any of them expected. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the 3 killers lay dead in the dust, and the third was bleeding from a shoulder wound that convinced him to seek medical attention. Elsewhere, James had taken a bullet in his left shoulder, a wound that had ended his law enforcement career but saved Wade's life. During James's recovery, Wade had stayed in Tombstone longer than was wise, visiting the wounded deputy and trying to find words for gratitude that couldn't be expressed. "Why did you do it?" Wade had asked one afternoon as he helped James change. His bandages, "Because it was the right thing to do," James had replied simply. "Because every man deserves a chance to be better than his worst mistakes." Those words had haunted Wade for months afterward. When he finally left Tombstone, he carried James Harper's example with him like a compass pointing toward redemption. Every time he'd been tempted to take the easy path, to solve problems with violence instead of justice, he'd remembered the young deputy who'd risked everything to give a stranger a second chance. Now, holding the locket that contained James's image, Wade realized that his entire transformation from gunfighter to protector had begun with James Harper's courage. The man who died protecting his family was the same one who'd first shown Wade that strength could be used to shield the innocent instead of intimidating the guilty. A soft sound from the doorway made Wade look up. Molly stood there in her nightgown, drawn from sleep by some instinct that told her something important was happening. "Papa Wade, what's wrong?" Wade held up the locket, his voice thick with emotion. "Where did you get this, sweetheart?" Molly padded across the room and climbed into his lap, studying the opened locket with serious eyes. "Mama gave it to me before I got on the train. She said I should only show it to you when the bad men came close, because you'd understand what it meant." "What did she tell you about the man in this picture?" "That's my papa," Molly said proudly. "Mama said he was the bravest man she ever knew except for you. She said he saved your life once, and that's why we could trust you to save mine." Wade's throat constricted as the full weight of Catherine Harper's final gift settled on his shoulders. She'd known exactly who she was sending her daughter to, not just any friend of her husband's, but the man whose life James had saved, whose transformation James had inspired, whose debt to their family could never be repaid in any currency, except love and protection. "Papa Wade?" Molly's small voice broke through his emotional storm. "Are you crying?" Wade wiped his eyes roughly, surprised to find them wet. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they remember how much they love someone, like how I cry when I miss Mama and Papa. Exactly like that. Wade closed the locket carefully and handed it back to her. "Your papa was a very special man, Molly. He saved my life when I was young and foolish, and now I get to save yours. It's like a circle that keeps going around." Molly studied the locket thoughtfully. "Mama said Papa told stories about Uncle Wade, who could shoot faster than lightning and fight 10 men at once. Were you Uncle Wade?" Wade nodded, amazed at how the truth sounded when spoken by a child's innocent voice. "I was. But that was a long time ago, before I learned better ways to solve problems. Papa said you became good after you were bad. He said that was the most important kind of good there was." James Harper's wisdom, filtered through his daughter's pure understanding, hit Wade like a physical blow. All these years he'd carried guilt about his violent past, never realizing that James had seen his transformation as something to admire, rather than judge. "Your papa was right," Wade said softly. "The most important kind of good is the kind you choose after you've known what bad feels like." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Wade stood quickly, settling. Molly on her feet and moving to the window. In the pale moonlight, he could see riders approaching from multiple directions, more than the 3 Sheriff Jenkins had reported. "Molly," Wade said urgently, "remember what we talked about. Time to play the hiding game." She nodded solemnly and clutched the locket to her chest. "The root cellar?" "The root cellar," Wade confirmed. "And Molly, no matter what you hear, don't come out until I come for you personally. Promise me." "I promise, Papa Wade." As Molly disappeared through the kitchen floor into the hidden cellar below, Wade retrieved his weapons with hands that no longer trembled. The Colt .45 settled against his hip like a familiar friend, and the Winchester rifle felt solid and reassuring in his grip. He'd spent 3 years trying to bury Wade Kimball, the gunfighter, but tonight he needed those skills. More than he'd ever needed anything in his life. The irony wasn't lost on him. James Harper had saved him from dying as a violent man, and now Wade would honor that gift by becoming violent again. Not for money or reputation or pride, but for love and protection and the sacred duty of keeping James Harper's daughter safe. A voice called out from the darkness beyond the porch. "Wade Kimball, we know you're in there." Wade stepped to the front window, rifle ready. "I hear you. What do you want?" "We want the Harper girl. Send her out, and maybe we'll let you live." "Can't do that," Wade called back. "She's under my protection." Harsh laughter echoed across the yard. "Your protection? You're just one old gunfighter who should have stayed retired." Wade smiled grimly in the darkness. They thought they were facing a broken down has been trying to relive past glories. They had no idea they'd just declared war on a man who'd found something worth dying for. "Maybe so," Wade shouted back, "but James Harper's daughter isn't going anywhere with you. If you want her, you'll have to go through me." "That can be arranged," came the reply. "You've got until dawn to change your mind." As silence fell over the homestead, Wade settled in to wait for the longest night of his life. In the root cellar below, Molly Harper clutched her parents' locket and trusted Papa Wade to keep his promise. Neither of them knew that before sunrise, the debt between 2 friends would finally be paid in full. Dawn was still hours away when Wade heard the distinctive whistle that meant Doc Brennan was approaching through the darkness. He opened the back door cautiously, rifle at the ready, and saw the older man leading his horse on foot with Sheriff Jenkins close behind. Both men carried weapons and the grim expressions of people who'd made peace with dangerous decisions. "Figured you could use some company," Doc said quietly as they slipped inside the house. "How many are we facing?" Jenkins asked, moving immediately to a front window. "I count at least 8, maybe 10, Wade replied. "They've got the place surrounded, but they're staying back for now. Professional spacing, good discipline. These aren't amateur claim jumpers." Doc Brennan set his old army rifle against the wall and removed a leather satchel from his coat. "Brought medical supplies. Figured we might need them before this is over." "And I brought these," Jenkins said, producing 2 deputy badges from his vest pocket. "If we're going to fight, we might as well make it legal. What do you say, Wade? Want to be a lawman again?" Wade stared at the badge, remembering the last time he'd worn one. A lifetime ago, when the world had seemed simpler and right and wrong were easier to distinguish. "I'm not sure I'm deputy material anymore, Sheriff. You're protecting an innocent child from killers," Jenkins said firmly. "Sounds like lawman work to me." Wade pinned the badge to his shirt, feeling the weight of official responsibility settle on his shoulders alongside personal obligation. "What about the rest of the gang? Are they all here?" "Near as I can tell," Jenkins replied. "Vincent Creed and his brothers, plus their hired guns. They rode in bold as brass yesterday, didn't even try to hide their intentions." "That's not their style," Wade said grimly. "They want people to know they're here, want the fear to spread. It's part of how they control territory." A soft creaking from the floor made all 3 men tense before Wade held up a calming hand. "It's all right. Molly's in the root cellar. But she might need reassurance." Wade knelt beside the hidden trapdoor and spoke softly. "Molly, it's Papa Wade. Doc and Sheriff Jenkins are here to help us. Everything's going to be fine." Her muffled voice came from below. I heard horses and voices. Are the bad men still outside? They are, but we're ready for them. You just stay hidden like we practiced, okay? Okay, Papa Wade. I have Mama's locket with me and I'm being very brave. Wade's chest tightened at her courage. That's my good girl. I'll come get you when it's safe. As he stood, Doc Brennan placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. She's lucky to have you, Wade. James Harper chose well when he trusted you with his daughter. How did you? Wade began, then saw the understanding in the older man's eyes. You knew James. Treated a bullet wound for him once, about 15 years ago. Shoulder injury that ended his law career, but didn't slow down his sense of justice. Doc's expression grew thoughtful. He talked about the man whose life he'd saved. Wondered what became of him. Said he hoped that man would find something worth living for, instead of just something worth dying for. Wade felt the weight of destiny settling around him like armor. Looks like he got his wish. The next few hours passed in tense preparation. Using Molly's hand-drawn map, they positioned themselves to cover the most likely approaches to the house. Wade took the front windows, Sheriff Jenkins covered the back, and Doc Brennan positioned himself where he could provide covering fire for either position while still reaching anyone who might be wounded. As the eastern horizon began to show the faintest hint of gray, a voice called out from the darkness, "Time's up, Kimball. Send out the girl or we start shooting." Wade moved to the window and called back, "I told you last night, she's under my protection. If you want her, come and take her." "Have it your way," came the reply. "But remember, you chose this." The silence that followed felt heavy with impending violence. Wade checked his weapons one final time, ensuring every cylinder was loaded, every action was smooth. Beside him, Doc Brennan and Sheriff Jenkins made their own final preparations with the quiet efficiency of men who'd faced danger before. "Wade," Doc said quietly, "there's something you should know before this starts. I found James Harper's final letter to you." Wade turned sharply. "What letter?" Doc reached into his coat and produced a sealed envelope, its edges stained with what looked like blood. "Molly had it hidden with the locket. She was supposed to give it to you when the bad men came. But I think she forgot in all the excitement." Wade took the letter with trembling hands. His name was written across the front in James Harper's familiar handwriting, but the paper felt heavier than its weight suggested. He broke the seal carefully and unfolded the pages within. "Wade," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then Catherine and I are dead, and our daughter is in your care. I pray that the man who saved my life so many years ago will find it in his heart to save hers as well." Wade's throat tightened as he continued reading. The letter detailed James's discovery of silver on his claim, the escalating threats from the Creed gang, and his growing certainty that violence was inevitable. But it was the personal passages that hit Wade like physical blows. "You probably don't remember a scared young deputy in Tombstone who got in over his head trying to play hero," James had written, "but I never forgot the lesson you taught me. That night, that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified. You changed my life, Wade, showed me what it meant to stand between evil and innocence." The letter went on to describe James's efforts to build a peaceful life for his family while never forgetting the harsh realities of frontier justice. He'd named Wade as Molly's guardian not just because he trusted him, but because he believed Wade was the only man alive who could protect her from the kind of violence that had claimed her parents. "I know you retired your guns after losing Katie," the letter continued. "I know you've been trying to find peace in solitude, but sometimes peace has to be fought for, Wade. Sometimes the only way to protect innocence is to embrace the violence we'd rather leave behind." The final paragraph made Wade's hands shake. "If the Creeds come for Molly, and they will, remember that you're not fighting for revenge or money or reputation. You're fighting for the future, for the right of children to grow up safe and loved. You're fighting for every James Harper who ever stood between a gun and an innocent person, and every Wade Kimball who ever chose redemption over destruction." Wade folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket beside his heart. Around him, Doc Brennan and Sheriff Jenkins waited quietly, understanding that some moments were too sacred for interruption. He knew, Wade said finally. James knew this day would come, and he knew exactly what it would cost. What did he say? Doc asked gently. Wade checked his gun one final time, his movements precise and deadly. He said it was time to stop running from who I used to be and start using those skills to protect who I want to become. A gunshot shattered the pre-dawn silence, followed immediately by the splintering of wood as a bullet punched through the front wall. The siege of Wade Kimball's homestead had begun. "Positions!" Wade called out as more shots erupted from the darkness. "Remember, they want Molly alive, which means they can't use too much firepower on the house itself. That's our advantage." "What about our disadvantage?" Jenkins called back, ducking as a bullet shattered the window above his head. Wade smiled grimly as he sighted down his rifle barrel. "They're fighting a man who's got nothing left to lose and everything to protect. That makes them the ones at a disadvantage." Below them, hidden in the root cellar, Molly Harper clutched her parents' locket and listened to the sound of Papa Wade keeping his promise. Above her, 3 men prepared to honor the sacrifice of James Harper by ensuring his daughter would live to see another sunrise. The battle for Molly's future was about to begin, and Wade Kimball, deputy, gunfighter, father, and guardian, was ready to face whatever came through his door. James Harper had saved his life 15 years ago, and now Wade would repay that debt in the only currency that mattered. Love fierce enough to kill for and strong enough to die for. The sun was rising, painting the sky the color of blood and hope, and Wade Kimball had never been more certain of his purpose in life. The attack began with the methodical precision of men who'd perfected their craft through years of violence. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions simultaneously, muzzle flashes blooming like deadly flowers in the grey pre-dawn light. Wade ducked below the windowsill as bullets shattered glass and splintered wood around him, but his mind remained calm and focused. He'd been in worse situations before, though never with stakes this personal. The familiar weight of his Colt .45 against his hip felt like a reunion with an old friend, and his hands moved with the muscle memory of countless gunfights. This was what he'd been born to do, even if it had taken him 15 years to understand. "Why?" "2 coming around the barn," Sheriff Jenkins called from the back of the house. His rifle cracked twice in quick succession, and Wade heard a cry of pain, followed by the sound of someone hitting the ground hard. "Good shooting," Wade called. Back, then turned his attention to the front approach. Through the broken window, he could see figures moving between the outbuildings, using the cover of darkness and his own structures against him. Professional tactics from professional killers. Doc Brennan's army rifle spoke from his position near the kitchen, the old man's aim as steady as his nerves. "Got one trying to reach the porch," he announced with grim satisfaction. Wade rose just enough to sight through the window frame and spotted a muzzle flash from behind his own water trough. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were using his own homestead as a fortress to attack him. He lined up his shot carefully and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report was followed by silence from that particular position. "Wade," Doc's voice carried urgent warning. "Movement on your left." Wade spun and saw a figure sprinting toward the house, using the distraction of the main assault to get close. The man was fast and kept low, making himself a difficult target in the uncertain light. Wade's first shot missed, kicking up dirt near the runner's feet. His second shot found its mark, spinning the attacker around and dropping him in the yard. Jaggi. Gunfire intensified, bullets punching through the walls with increasing frequency. Wade realized the attackers were getting frustrated with their lack of progress and growing less concerned about potential damage to their prize. A stray bullet could kill Molly just as effectively as an intentional one. "They're getting reckless," he called to his companions. "Time to even the odds." Wade moved to the front door and flung it open, his rifle ready. The bold move caught the attackers off guard. They'd expected him to remain defensive, picking at them from behind cover. Instead, he stepped onto his own porch like a man walking to church, rifle steady and eyes cold. A gunman near the barn turned to fire at this unexpected target, but Wade was faster. His shot took the man's center mass, the impact visible even at 50 yards. Another attacker tried to rush him while he worked the rifle's action, but Wade's sidearm cleared leather with snake-like speed. The Colt bucked twice in his hand, and the rushing figure tumbled to the ground. "That's the Wade Kimball I remember," Doc Brennan called out, his voice carrying both admiration and relief. But the boldness of Wade's move had consequences. A rifle cracked from the tree line, and Wade felt the bullet crease his left arm like a line of fire. He stumbled backward, into the house, his rifle dropping from suddenly nerveless fingers. "Wade's hit," Jenkins called out, leaving his position to help. "I'm all right," Wade insisted, though blood was already soaking through his shirt sleeve. "Just a graze." Doc Brennan was beside him in seconds, his medical training taking over from his fighting instincts. "Let me see that arm," Wade allowed the doctor to examine. The wound, while keeping his attention focused on the continuing battle. The bullet had torn through muscle without hitting bone, painful but not incapacitating. Doc quickly bandaged the injury with strips torn from a kitchen towel. "You'll live," Doc pronounced, "but that arm's going to be stiff for a while." "Long enough to finish this," Wade said grimly, retrieving his rifle with his good arm. The attack was faltering. Wade's unexpected counterattack had cost them at least 3 men, and the survivors were reassessing their strategy. In the growing daylight, Wade could see bodies scattered around his homestead, a grim testament to the price of threatening Molly Harper. A voice called out from the barn. "Kimball, this is Vincent Creed. I want to talk." Wade moved to the broken window but stayed behind cover. "I'm listening. You're better than I expected, old man. But you can't win. I've got more men coming, and you're running out of ammunition." "I've got enough for you, Creed," Wade called back. "Maybe. But what about the girl? How long before a stray bullet finds her? How long before we burn you out?" Wade's blood turned to ice. Creed was right about the danger to Molly, and fire was a threat Wade couldn't counter indefinitely. But surrender would mean certain death for both of them. From his coat pocket, Wade pulled out his lucky silver dollar, the coin he'd carried through every gunfight of his career. The same coin he'd flipped before facing those 3 killers in Tombstone, the night James Harper had saved his life. He looked at the worn silver surface, remembering all the times it had guided him through impossible choices. Then he smiled, grimly, and flipped it high into the morning air, watching it spin and catch the early sunlight. When he caught it, Wade Kimball knew exactly what he had to do. Wade pocketed the silver dollar and turned to his companions with the calm expression of a man who'd found peace with an impossible decision. "Doc, Sheriff, I need you to do something for me." "What do you have in mind?" Jenkins asked, reloading his rifle with practiced efficiency. "I'm going out there, going to face Creed man to man, settle this the old way." Doc Brennan's face went pale. "Wade, that's suicide. Even if you beat Creed, his men will gun you down the second it's over." "Maybe," Wade acknowledged. "But it's, the only way to draw them away from the house. While they're focused on me, you two get Molly out of here, take her to town, then send word to Martha Henley. She'll know what to do." Sheriff Jenkins stepped forward, his weathered face grim. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself, Wade. There has to be another way." Wade smiled sadly and touched the deputy badge on his chest. "Sometimes there isn't another way, Sheriff. Sometimes a man has to stand in the gap and hold the line, whatever the cost." Before either man could protest further, Wade moved to the front door. "Creed," he called out, "you want to settle this? Come out and face me." "Just you and me, the way it should be." "Wade, no!" Doc Brennan hissed, but it was too late. Laughter echoed from the barn. "The famous Wade Kimball wants a showdown. How poetic." "All right, old man, you've got yourself a fight." Wade stepped onto the porch, his wounded arm throbbing but his gun hand steady. In the growing daylight, he could see Vincent Creed emerging from behind the barn, a tall, lean man with dead eyes and a reputation for cruelty that stretched across 3 territories. 2 ivory-handled pistols hung at his hips, and his smile. "And promised violence. Been looking forward to this, Kimball," Creed called as he walked into the open yard. "Heard you were fast once upon a time." "Fast enough," Wade replied, stepping down from the porch. They approached each other with the measured pace of predators, each step bringing them closer to a moment that would define everything. Wade was aware of Creed's men watching from cover, fingers on triggers, ready to end this, however it played out. But his focus remained on the killer before him. "You know this won't save the girl," Creed said conversationally as they reached speaking distance. "Even if you beat me, which you won't, my boys will finish what we started." "Maybe," Wade agreed, "but you won't be around to see it." Creed's smile widened. Confident for a man past his prime. Experience for a man who's never learned the difference between killing and justice. They stood 20 paces apart now, the traditional distance for formal duels. Wade could feel the weight of James Harper's letter over his heart, the pressure of Molly's trust in the root cellar below, the accumulated weight of every choice that had brought him to this moment. "Any last words, Kimball?" Wade's hand hovered near his gun, muscles coiled and ready. "Yeah, tell the devil Wade Kimball sent you." The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Birds had stopped singing, wind had ceased blowing, and even the distant cattle seemed to sense the gravity of what was about to unfold. Creed's hand moved first, fast as striking lightning. But Wade had been waiting for that movement, reading it in the killer's eyes and shoulders. His own draw was pure instinct. 15 years of muscle memory compressed into a heartbeat of motion. 2 guns cleared leather simultaneously. 2 hammers. Who fell. 2 bullets flew across 20 paces of frontier justice. Vincent Creed's shot went wide, his aim spoiled by the shock of the .45 caliber bullet that had just punched through his chest. He staggered backward, looking down at the spreading crimson stain with the expression of a man who'd never believed his own mortality. Wade's gun was already trained on the other killers, as Creed fell to his knees, then pitched forward into the dirt. "Anyone else want to dance?" Wade called out, his voice carrying across the yard like a challenge from the grave. But his moment of triumph was short-lived. Pain exploded through his side as a rifle bullet found its mark, spinning him around and dropping him to one knee. Blood soaked through his shirt as he struggled to stay conscious, his vision blurring at the edges. Through the haze of pain, he heard a small voice call out, "Papa Wade!" and turned to see Molly emerging from the house, her porcelain doll clutched in one hand and something else in the other. "Molly, no!" he gasped. "Get back inside!" But she was already running toward him, her child's instinct to protect overriding. Every lesson about hiding and safety. As she reached his side, Wade saw what she held in her other hand, his silver dollar, the one she must have picked up when it fell during the fight. "You drop this," she said seriously, pressing the coin into his palm. "You said it was lucky." Wade looked down at her trusting face, then at the coin she'd risked her life to return to him. The gesture was so innocent, so purely motivated by love, that it took his breath away. She'd seen him fall and thought only of helping, not of her. "Oh, danger!" That's when the remaining gunman made his mistake. Seeing Molly in the open, he rose from cover to take the shot that would end Vincent Creed's mission permanently. Wade saw the movement, saw the rifle swinging toward Molly, and felt time slow to a crawl. With his last strength, he raised his Colt and fired. The shot took the gunman's center mass, dropping him before he could complete his aim. As Wade collapsed beside Molly, he felt her small arms wrap around him. "It's okay, Papa Wade," she whispered. "The bad men are all gone now." Wade smiled through his pain, holding her close as the morning sun painted the world in shades of gold and redemption. James Harper's debt was finally paid, and Molly Harper was safe. 6 months later, Wade stood in the cemetery behind Millbrook's small church, his left arm still stiff from the wounds he'd taken during the siege, but his spirit lighter than it had been in years. In his hands, he held a simple wooden cross he'd carved during the long weeks of recovery, a marker for James Harper's grave that had been too long in coming. Molly stood beside him, no longer the frightened orphan who'd waited alone at the train station, but a confident young girl whose laughter had returned to fill the spaces between her tears. She wore a new dress that Martha Henley had sewn for her, and her hair was braided with ribbons that caught the afternoon sunlight. "Is this where we'll put Papa James?" she asked, studying the peaceful spot Wade had chosen beneath an old oak tree. "If you think he'd like it here," Wade replied, "next to your mama, looking out over the valley they loved." Molly nodded solemnly. He always said he wanted to rest somewhere he could watch over his family. Now he can watch over all of us. Wade knelt and placed the wooden cross at the head of the unmarked grave where they'd finally laid James and Catherine Harper to rest. The words he'd carved into the wood were simple but heartfelt. James Harper, beloved husband, father, and friend, he saved more lives than he ever knew. As Wade stood, Molly slipped her hand into his, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the past months. The trust implicit in that simple touch never failed to humble him. She'd chosen him as her father not through blood or law, but through the deeper bonds of love and protection. "Papa Wade," she said, using the name that no longer sounded strange to either of them. "Are you sad that Papa James is dead?" Wade considered the question carefully. "I'm sad that I never got to thank him properly for saving my life. But I'm grateful every day that he trusted me with yours. Do you think he knows about how we take care of each other now?" Wade looked down at her earnest face, remembering all the ways she'd surprised him over the past months, the ways she'd nursed him through his recovery with the same devotion he'd shown her, the way she'd stood up to the few townspeople who still whispered about their unconventional family, the way she'd insisted on learning to shoot, not from bloodlust, but from the practical understanding that sometimes good people needed to protect themselves from evil ones. "I think he knows," Wade said honestly. "I think he and your mama both know that you're safe and loved and growing up to be exactly the kind of person they hoped you'd become." The adoption papers had been finalized just last week, making official what had been true in their hearts since the day they'd met. Molly Harper was now Molly Kimball, daughter of Wade Kimball, ward of Millbrook Territory, and the most precious thing in her father's world. The legal proceedings had been surprisingly smooth, helped by Sheriff Jenkins's testimony about Wade's heroic defense of the child and Martha Henley's passionate advocacy for their little family. Even Frederick Walsh, who'd once worried about harboring a wanted man, had spoken in favor of the adoption, moved by the obvious love between father and daughter. Doc Brennan had been Wade's best man at the simple ceremony, proudly standing beside the man he'd helped fight for a child's future. The old physician had recovered from his own minor wounds with typical stoicism, claiming that the excitement had been good for his circulation. Besides, he'd told Wade during one of their chess games, "It's not every day a man gets to be part of a legend. Wait until I tell my grandchildren about the day we stood off the Creed gang." The story had indeed become legend throughout the territory, growing in the telling until Wade barely recognized himself in the tales travelers carried from town to town. In some versions, he'd single-handedly faced down 20 killers. In others, he'd called down lightning from heaven to strike his enemies. The truth that a broken man had found the strength to fight for love was both simpler and more profound than any legend. Wade's homestead had been repaired and improved with help from half the men in Millbrook who'd arrived without invitation. To replace damaged walls and windows, the barn bore new scars from bullet holes, but the house itself had been restored to better condition than before the attack. Molly's room, for it was truly hers now, not just Katie's room with a temporary occupant, displayed both girls' treasures side by side. Katie's music box sat next to Molly's porcelain doll, and both children's drawings decorated the walls. Wade had finally found peace with keeping Katie's memory alive while building new memories with Molly. Papa Wade, Molly said as they walked. Back toward the homestead, Martha says I'm ready for advanced arithmetic and reading. She wants to order special books from back east. Wade smiled, proud of her quick mind and eager curiosity. Martha Henley had become not just Molly's teacher, but a close family friend, often joining them for Sunday dinners and helping Wade navigate the complexities of raising a brilliant, strong-willed daughter. Whatever you need to learn, sweetheart. Your parents wanted you to have every advantage, and so do I. As they crested the hill overlooking their home, Wade felt the familiar surge of gratitude that had become his daily companion. The White House with its wide porch looked exactly as it should, welcoming, secure, and filled with the promise of family dinners and bedtime stories and all the ordinary miracles of domestic life. In the distance, he could see their cattle grazing, peacefully in pastures that had once echoed with gunfire. The vegetable garden Molly had insisted on planting was showing the first green shoots of spring growth. Smoke rose from the chimney, where she'd left a pot of stew simmering for their return. It was the life James Harper had envisioned for his daughter, safe, loving, and full of possibilities. It was also the life Wade Kimball had never dared imagine for himself. Redemption measured not in violence overcome, but in love freely given and joyfully received. As they reached the front porch, Molly paused and looked back toward the cemetery where her parents now rested in peace. "Thank you, Papa James," she whispered to the wind. "Thank you for sending me to Papa Wade." Wade squeezed her hand gently and opened the door to their home, their future, and the family they'd built from loss and love and the unshakable faith that some debts could only be paid forward. Inside, Katie's music box played its gentle waltz, while Molly's laughter filled the spaces that had once echoed with loneliness. And Wade Kimball, gunfighter turned father, knew that James Harper's greatest gift hadn't been saving his life. It had been showing him what that life was truly worth.